Okay, we're back on the
about
show.
that.
We're
But
back
you
on the
changed
show.
your hair, so
She
it took me a while to.
I think
figure
I'm
out.
younger, actually.
Actually, you look younger.
Yeah.
You do.
It's because I'm sleeping now.
Oh,
I wasn't sleeping back in those days.
well, see.
Yeah.
Well, you guys already know each other. Jen Frankel, my
Yeah.
co-host today, and
right.
Timothy Spearman, the author of Shakespeare's Codex. All
All the world's a stage.
No.
All the world staged, and we are merely played. So it's a changed title.
I
Okay,
like
Tim.
it.
Let's get into the meat of it, right? Because it just seems it doesn't matter what happens now, whether it's everything is like a false flag event. It's orchestrated from on high or something.
All
or,
the facts are opinions. All the opinions are facts.
right. But now blockchain offers us fact bar technology.
Except now people are starting to poke holes in blockchain. There are no absolutes in this world.
There
I
is no
guess.
problem caused by technology that technology cannot overcome. Right, Tim?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's always with the world of crime and the world of crime solving, there's this constant race and in terms of technology. The narco terrorists, if you want to call them that, down in Mexico actually had their own cell phone system, their own cell phone network, their own cell phone towers, and they were able to completely encrypt all of their communications so that the police couldn't track any of their
Right.
communications. And so, you know, when you can't, in our system, get a proper signal and often have telecommunication problems, you can see that, in fact, the world of crime is way ahead of the rest of us. So.
When I was growing up, I had a friend whose dad was a gunsmith, one of the last true gunsmiths in Canada, and he was hired by the law enforcement to keep up with the innovations that criminals were making with firearms, because they were always ahead of law enforcement in terms of the firepower they had.
Sure. Yeah. When the Chinese government was in the throes of the communist revolution, they banned guns because, not surprisingly, when any kind of totalitarian regime takes power, they often invoke gun control legislation first in order to implement the various steps needed to take over and assert military dictatorship. And so we see this being attempted in the United States today. And so a lot of these mass shooting, staged events are to create the problem which will provide the reaction and the public outcry that will lead to the solution, which is the confiscation of guns through gun confiscation legislation.
But Jen's probably all for that.
It's one of those things where if the reasons and the moderation are playing into it, like we saw what happened in Australia with the Port Arthur shooting, and gun control following on the heels of that. Gun crime has decreased in Australia. So if that was the main reason, it's worked. The thing I see in America right now is that the people that are the biggest advocates for keeping guns in civilian hands are also the ones who are most likely to misuse them, it seems. It almost seems like the more there's a push to take guns away, the more people feel radicalized to use them as much as possible in the worst possible ways.
Yeah, well, anyway, however you stand on the issue of gun control or the banning of guns, United Nations has an agenda to see that guns are banned worldwide, and so these acts and laws that are attempting to come in through legislation are meant to do just that, is to bring the laws into lockstep with the UN agenda, which is to see that guns are eliminated worldwide and that the citizenry don't have any access to guns. And I frankly, I just don't think it's a good thing. I think you do have the right to defend your property and your life, and you should be able to do so. And I don't think that the state should be taking people's right to defend themselves through the bearing of arms away from them. Obviously, there's abuses, and I'm not against the idea of perhaps putting limitations on what classes and what types of firearms are
Right.
available. I mean, it's
Like when you hear
obviously-
about somebody in the States who goes on a rampage and then you find out that they've had like 500 guns. It
Yeah.
seems to go beyond self-defense there.
Yeah, or even the fact that they're using
An AK-40.
an AK-47 type of weapon, and that's overkill, right? So
Yeah.
we don't necessarily want to endorse that. Anyway, I don't know that we're on topic. But
No, I'm really curious to know what we're supposed to be talking about. Because that was...
Yes,
well, false flag terror operations really is what he had brought up. And so I'm just illustrating what many people have a hard time imagining why the alphabet soup agencies would do such a thing. And I think in part what it is that they have counter-terrorist operations in play, whether it be the FBI or other policing agencies, or Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm Bureau, for example. And so in order to justify the war on terrorism, in order to justify the budgets and so forth, they can sometimes stage events so that it looks as if a terrorist event was about to take place, which they in fact nipped in the bud. And they provided the means. They provided the bomb, the incendiary device. They provided the whole plan. They recruited the op.
The anthrax from the secret facility.
Yeah, and so in some cases it's done to promote their own policing agenda and to justify a budget. And sometimes it's done for more than one reason, and it's done for a multitude of different purposes. But ultimately, I believe it's problem, reaction, solution tactics to justify more surveillance, more searches and seizures, more police powers, more surveillance cameras on the streets, more...
And then more budget. Like just...
Yeah, and
it always comes down to
ultimately-
the money in the end, doesn't it?
And we're told that it's to keep us safer, and many people buy into that, but then our freedoms go out the door at the same time. So you have to decide which would you rather have, freedom or tyranny. And okay, you may be safe, but are you really living a life?
Well, there's that quote, those who are willing to trade freedom for security will have neither.
So yeah.
So the book, All the World is Staged. So Tim, maybe what's the essence of it? I mean, I brought up false flag terror, but who's staging it? And what's the end game?
I like to use the expression all roads point to Rome. So in the days of the Roman Empire, their agenda was to divide and conquer, to divide the people into factions, and then to assert control, order out of chaos, was basically what was in play. The ends justify the means by any means. And so if you look at the Vatican and how it's operated, the military wing of the Vatican is known as the Jesuit order. It's sometimes called the Society of Jesus or the Company of Jesus. And the CIA, for example, which is thought to be a federal agency of the United States, is in fact operated by the Vatican. It's operated by the Jesuit order. Its secret name is the Knights of the Holy See. And it's also called the Company because It's the American branch of the Company of Jesus, or the Society of Jesus. It's the American branch of this Jesuit order.
Am I right in thinking that the Jesuits they run what's left of the Inquisition, the Congregation of the Holy, what is it called, the Faithful? There's an organization that's kind of the modern offshoot of the Inquisition, and the Jesuits run that too. They seem to be very good at doing things that require investigation and persuasion.
All roads point to Rome. So, whether they were created by an earlier parent organization or whether they parent a series of other organizations which act as a series of front organizations that they can basically hide behind and conceal their hand in all operations. Again, it doesn't matter. It's 6 of one half dozen of another.
It's the effect that
all roads point to Rome.
Right.
It's the empire. So the empire changed its name to the Holy Roman Empire. And their influence is huge. Events that we would never have associated with Rome are associated with Rome. The Titanic is explored in the book. The Titanic disaster. The White Star shipping line was owned by the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church. Captain Smith was, in fact, an agent of Rome. He was a Jesuit of the Short Row. He had been involved in many seagoing accidents. There were a litany of them. All of them are listed in the book. They weren't accidents. The best way to commit a homicide is to have it so that the corpus delicti cannot be traced, and the best way of doing it is in a situation where there can be no witnesses, like Princess Diana being killed inside of a tunnel.
And Tim, if I could just mention about the Titanic, because the part of what resulted with the death of all those passengers was that some of those passengers were
Captains of industry?
Well, they were. This was as the whole debate was happening to create the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S., and so a lot of the voices that were against the Federal Reserve Bank being reconstituted died in the Titanic.
Really?
Yeah, and then a few years later, when was Titanic?
No. 1913 was the year that the Federal Reserve Bank was inaugurated,
Right.
So that's just 1 year later.
Yeah.
And J.P. Morgan died in the spring of 1913. He was a Vatican banker, and he bankrolled all of the construction of these big superliners, of which the Titanic and the Olympic were but one of many.
Right.
There was the Coptic. There were a whole host of them. And Captain Smith was actually the captain of several of these different ships in the course of his career. He should have had his mariner's license revoked after one seagoing accident. How can you have a litany of them and not only retain your job, but also find that you're promoted to the Commodore of the fleet, which is the highest?
George W. Bush?
As in the guy that was in charge of the U.S. Air Force on 9/11, Richard B. Myers, who was in a Senate hearing committee meeting just 3 days after the 9/11 event, being asked how it was that he failed to have any military response to 9/11, and he was being promoted, receiving a job promotion to the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the highest military position in the country next to the chief of the military, which is the president himself.
That's an aspect of 9/11 that gets glossed over a lot. The fact that every single plane that might have responded seemed to be out of range.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of what they do as a modus operandi, which is to stage simultaneous emergency drill exercise at the same time as one of these events. And we've seen this repeated in a number of operations. The Boston Marathon bombing, there was a drill exercise being conducted at the same time as the actual emergency was taking place, and the operatives of the Department of Defense were on scene conducting the drill. and they were told to look for an incendiary in the area, and they were all wearing knapsacks as part of the drill. So how could you distinguish the perpetrator from those that were actually involved in the drill?
It is interesting, though, because one thing that people always seem to point out with these false flag operations is that, and I'm not sure it's ever interpreted this way, but there seems to be a deliberate attempt to minimize the damage to the public, to make sure that the impact is as great as possible, but to also make sure that everything is there to clean up it. And this is one of the things that was pointed out in the Port Arthur shooting too. That there was this is on like near Hobart in Tasmania, which is like the most remote part of Australia. But there was a huge medical examiners conference there at the same time as this mass shooting, and they'd also I think they just ordered this huge morgue truck at the same time. For this tiny little part of Australia.
That's
so there's all these
interesting.
weird things that definitely...
Well, even 9/11, the fact that only less than 3,000 people died that day.
Yeah.
When those towers combined
Yeah.
held 55,000 workers, right? And then only 3,000
Well,
people
not to
died.
mention all of the area around that
Yeah.
that
Well,
the buildings didn't
That's
fall
the nice
on.
thing about a building falling into its own
Really nice,
footprint,
eh?
right?
Yeah. But people always talk about why nobody comes up with nobody rats on the conspiracy. But why would people who were involved in something they believed in ever rat on it? That's never been a
What's
compelling
going on
argument for me.
But even if all roads point to Rome, I mean, what is? Let's say, imagine for a minute that is the case. I mean, what is Rome trying to do, or whoever it is
Money
that's
and
trying to do
power?
that? What is what's the objective?
Well, look at the back of the American $1 bill as an illustration, and truly an illustration, because there you see the Great Seal of the Bavarian Illuminati introduced onto the Great Seal of the United States as it's claimed to be. 1776 is the founding date of the United States, and also said to be the founding date of the Bavarian Illuminati, which was set up by the Jesuit priest Adam Weishaupt. So what does it say? It says Annuit Coptus Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is basically Latin for a start, which is the language of the Roman Empire. So what is Latin doing on the back of the American $1 bill if it
It's
doesn't
fancy.
point to the fact that there is some echo of the ancient world in the modern world, and there's got to be a reason for that. Why do we have an Egyptian obelisk in Washington, D.C. called the Washington Monument? And why do we have such a obelisk in most of the major capital cities of the world?
CN Tower
Capital-
arguably being one, and there are, coincidentally or not, 1,776 steps in the CN Tower.
Really?
You didn't know that?
No.
That's a factoid.
Yes.
That should be a fact bar.
Yeah, so, I mean, well, I've just connected the dots for people to see that if the Jesuit order set up the Bavarian Illuminati, and you can see that the Great Seal of the Bavarian Illuminati is on the back of the American $1 bill, and you can see this Latin inscription announcing the birth of the New World Order in Latin, then clearly there is some attempt to create a worldwide empire, a new world order, and obviously all roads point to Rome, as I've just indicated,
Well,
through all the connections that have
right.
just been established.
What gets me is, though, that, it just seems that whatever this is and who's ever behind it, it's not making life better for people. It's actually making life worse for people. Why can't whoever is behind this be conducting, even if it's got to be a conspiracy, to make people's lives better rather than to take away freedoms, make people's lives miserable? Like, why? Because I think if we use our brains properly, constructively, we can actually make things a lot better. But instead, the powers that be seem to be bent on making things worse.
Well, if you've ever tuned into George Freud's programs, or if you've ever seen his Conspiracy Cafe blog, you'll see that he does some Google Doodle analysis,
Yeah.
and they're quite interesting.
Yes, they are.
I keep, up with them pretty much. Not every one, but I find many of them very compelling.
You've
and
got
they
to
are-
explain what these are because this sounds interesting.
Well, I mean, Google has these doodles that they publish, and
Well, it's like when you go on Google and
And
it's
it- and
different
they've
today.
changed them.
Like they had one
Right.
for Canada Day, or they'll have
Yeah.
one to celebrate somebody's birthday.
Wright
or
brothers.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what he's talking about.
Right, okay.
and he believes that they actually telegraph their future plans, that it is all coded, and it's intended for their fellow ops to know what their next op is. And
Ooh.
Tim,
yeah.
I just want to say something else. I just saw. I'm just going to bring this up in terms of telegraphing things. I saw Mayor John Tory. He was something to do on Canada Day, just celebrating Canada Day. But they showed him on TV as he was talking. He had the Shriners float behind him with the Masonic square and compass symbol.
Yes.
I mean, it was all
Like
obviously,
framing him?
It wasn't just somebody actually put this together. Like, it wasn't just an accident. No,
Wow.
made him get a call. Go ahead.
Very
Tell-
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the book gets into that, and it also looks at how, in one chapter, the Jesuit order had a hand in the assassinations of all of the U.S. presidents that were assassinated. I'm currently working on a book called To Russia with Love, which is about what happened to the Russian royal family. And it appears like the Hand of Rome was involved in that as well, that
Well-
the Jesuit order was basically behind the Bolshevik Revolution.
Well, I heard another interesting tie-in to
Mm-hmm.
the death of the Romanovs, and that was that there was some more to do with the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, because or the Rothschilds, because they had a plan to create. This is early on, like an early version of the European Common Market, European Common Currency, and it was the Tsar, whoever it was at the time, who basically said, no, that's not a good idea, and quashed the project. And some say that at that point it was the Illuminati, the Rothschilds, whoever, said, we're going to get those Romanovs. And they certainly got gotten, didn't they?
Well, I don't believe a lot of it. For example, they did not die in the basement of a Patiev house in Ekaterinburg, as history would try to suggest that they had. There's a book called The File on the Tsar, which is a very, very good book that was done by BBC journalists. It's extremely well researched. It didn't have any preconceived notions. It was a completely objective piece of research. And their conclusion is that the Romanov family did not die in a Patiev house. And also, Anna Anderson, who was Anastasia, and the only reason she went by the name Anna Anderson is because she was trying to avoid the press, because she was constantly being hounded by them and harassed by them, and so she signed the hotel register on one occasion when she was in New York under the name Anna Anderson, and the name stuck. It had nothing to do with her identity. It had nothing to do with who she was. It was just a pseudonym she adopted to disguise who she was.
As celebrities do frequently now, even.
Even, yeah,
You do that?
I have done that.
What's...
And
won't ask.
Steve just told a story about like that over the weekend. You know what I'm saying?
You use Bob Young, don't you?
No,
Scott Young? Neil Young.
Brad Sloubis.
That was my next guess, honestly. So what's the scope of the book? What do you cover?
I also covered Gandhi in one of the early chapters, and show that he had concealed his Freemason affiliations, and his London diary, which was his Freemason diary, which was written largely in coded language. Only 20 pages of that book survive. I've read the complete works of Mahatma Gandhi, which is an extensive volume of work. It's contained on a CD-ROM. There's 400. In the edition, there's 400 books, I guess you could say, or compilations that have been compiled to create this complete works of Mahatma Gandhi. So anyway, the London diary, which was 120 pages long, only 20 pages survive extant. The rest have disappeared, even though he entrusted its safekeeping to his nephew. It is his Freemason diary, and the 20 pages that survive describe his initiation to the 3rd degree of Freemasonry, and I believe that that is the one that has been preserved so that those who are members of the Freemasonic order can easily recognize him as an initiate. Because
So that's basically a way of saying there's other code here, just look for it?
perhaps, or it could be that they just wanted to, like the 3rd degree is like the capstone of all the degrees. It's perhaps the most quintessential. So to preserve it and to have it intact alerts other operatives to the fact that he was one of them. He attended a lot of lodge meetings in Johannesburg, and his biographer, who's not really a professional biographer but an intimate friend, Reverend J.J. Doak, who's depicted in the film Gandhi by Richard Attenborough. That character basically had exchanges of letters with Gandhi, and Gandhi actually offered to write part of the biography himself in one of the letters. Is it okay? Should I write part of the biography myself? And he said, no, there's no need. And he actually said, we're going to make you appear to be a martyr. That was Reverend J.J. Doak's plan. And so the racial train and coach incident never took place, which is why I co-authored the book Gandhi Under Cross-Examination with with Colonel G.B. Singh. And we had a great deal of trouble getting that book published. We had to create our own publishing company called Sovereign Star Publishing down in California in order to get that book published, which was due to the good work of some Sikhs, because he belongs to the Sikh community, and they put forward the money for it. We eventually did publish it, and it was actually instrumental in having an investigation conducted in Westminster, because one of the Sikh MPs actually brought it up and felt that Gandhi, the case of Gandhi, needed to be reopened to examination.
Fascinating stuff, Tim. Now, let's go to the store. Tim.
And I'm going to go and sit outside in the sun.
Why don't you come and sit with us in
the
sun?
store?
Well, we have to go to the store first. Then we're going to go sit in the sun. You know what I'm saying?
Could
Bring
happen.
your friend.
Yeah.
I'm imaginary.
She's imaginary. Okay, Tim, I just decided, as you were telling me that last bit, I want your entire, I want all your books in my library. Where can I and everyone who's watching go and get your
The
stuff?
Spearman collection.
Yeah, if you go on to Amazon and just type in Timothy Spearman, you can see an array of them. There's also the Gandhi Under Cross-Examination book, which is under the title Tim Watson. So you can find that on Amazon as well. So.
My dear Watson, excellent to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it was
It's
fun.
really nice to see you again.
Yeah, it is, Jen. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it for the show, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We have to make a little trip to the store, and then we're going to go sit in the sun. You know what I'm saying? Thatchannel.com, signing off. We'll see you next time.
Great. Thank
That
you.
was great.
That was
Do you
fun.
still see George?
Yeah.
How is he doing?
Yeah, in fact, he was in the he's in a couple of our productions that we had here.
Oh.
Yeah. So, he's
He's doing a show here again.
Got health problems, but he's hanging in.
This is Lucinda. It's nice to meet you.
I feel like I met you before, and I feel like you just really, yeah, did you see that
She
movie?
was like the super host woman who like helped